So about 40 years ago, a book came out called The Inner Game of Tennis and by Tim Gallway. And some of you may have read it. I probably read it a long time ago. Um, but it doesn't talk about how to do a backhand or how to, do a serve, or of course, I don't know any of the lingo of tennis. It's all about the kind of the inner space or the kind of the inner meaning making, just to introduce a term that we're going to use a lot today, around how people show up in the game of tennis. And I've been for a long time really interested in the question around how do we show up. And so from the early days in Agile, about 20 years ago, my principal focus has been on like mindset and culture and meaning making, and and increasingly using the term inner agility as a kind of what needs to happen in order for agility to happen. And so that's been the sort of thing I've been involved in, and I've been designing and creating leadership programs along those lines. And that work eventually ended up being a book, going into my book called Evolve Agility, Growing an Agile Leadership Culture from the Inside Out. And so the book came out early 2019, and it's already, I already wish I could rewrite it. And so we've been doing a lot of work over the years since the book came out, developing the ideas, getting deeper into certain aspects of the book. Like for me, it's really been, the focus is on how to facilitate transformative learning environments. And that's been a big area of research, both in the programs I lead and in the research that I actually do. And all of this has culminated into our creating the Center for Inner Agility. And we'll say more about the center a little bit later, but basically the Center for Inner Agility is a place or an environment for us to develop this work and to share this work with people in the world, and to help people be able to carry this work and bring this work into the coaching work and the consulting work they do. So it's largely for leaders and for consultants and for coaches. Okay, so this session today launches what will probably be a series of monthly sessions, and we'll say more about upcoming events and things that we're doing. But the two main questions that we want to look at in today's session is, the first question is, what might we begin to understand, or how might we begin to understand the nature of inner agility? I think in a moment I'll provide a provisional definition of inner agility. And the second main question is, how can we catalyze its growth in ourselves and others? All right, that's a much tougher question. So in doing the work of the session, this is not easy work to do, especially trying to get this done inside 90 minutes. These are deep ideas, they're challenging ideas, because we have to introduce a vocabulary, we have to introduce a way of thinking to be able to even get on the court of this work. So, I'm going to be fairly demanding of your attention and of your kind of engagement with these ideas, and know that you don't have to necessarily, quote, understand everything. Part of it is just allowing it to find its way into you in whatever way that it does. Okay, so we'll start with a definition of inner agility. And sometimes I like to read these things. Inner agility refers to our capacity to make sense in the face of moments of surprise, ambiguity, and confusion, whether individually or collectively, in such a way that our actions fall naturally into a graceful dance with what is happening in those moments. It's to jump out of the loops that keep us stuck in what we already, quote, know, in order to service what might be possible. Okay, so already in this definition is problematic because there's a lot of vocabulary we've already introduced. So what do we mean by capacity? What do we mean by make sense? What do we mean to be in a graceful dance with? I mean, it's a nice poetic thing, but what does it really mean? It actually means something. right? What does it mean, loops that keep us stuck? What the heck could that be, right? Or what do we mean by already know? So in this talk, we're gonna begin to tease some of this stuff out. This is just going to be a taste, right? We only have 90 minutes. Typically, we have workshops and 6 or 8 month programs where we develop this at a much deeper way and a much more leisurely pace. So we're just going to get a little bit of a taste of this stuff today. Okay, so as we explore these two main questions, what's the nature of inner agility and how do we bring it about? I want to introduce two main ideas. And the first main idea is the notion of meaning making. And many of you have already encountered this term. It's a term from adult developmental psychology. The second idea is on the court versus in the stands. And those of you who've read Adaptive Leadership by, his name escapes me right at the moment, probably have seen these terms. And so those are the two ideas that we're going to be unfurling, we're going to be unfolding during the course of this first 50 minutes or hour. Okay, so let's start with meaning making. And I want to just unpack this somewhat slowly. So you could say that, that when we talk about human performance, and ultimately what we're talking about here is human performance. So I am a deep spiritual practitioner, as I know many of you are, right? And this work is spiritual in a way, but we don't use spiritual lingo. And I'm not going to get into why, but we use like the lingo of like performance. Like, what does it mean to show up? Performance is really about how we show up in the world. That's, simply said as I could say it. And there are two dimensions, according to adult developmental theory, which I really like because it has a really powerful way of talking about the nature of the mind as it relates to human performance. And the first dimension is they call horizontal. I'm not quite sure why they call it horizontal, but horizontal refers to our competency, our skill, our ability, the kind of action we're able to take and the kind of action we're not able to take. So there's certain ways in which we're not skillful, or we're not competent. And all of this happens in the horizontal domain. And most training programs, most leadership books, most leadership training programs tend to operate in this domain, although these days this is starting to change. The second dimension is referred to as vertical. And the vertical dimension has to do with how we make sense, moment by moment, of our experience. And you could say that the vertical, our capacity as it exists in the vertical dimension, determines to a great degree what we're able to do, the skillfulness we're able to bring to bear, the competency that we have. And also the horizontal dimension determines to a certain extent vertical. I'm not going to get into all of that right now. The main thing that I want to say right now is that the vertical dimension has to do with what in adult or actually developmental psychology they refer to as meaning making. And meaning making is the background, it's a psychic organizing schema that basically makes it possible that rather than dealing with the infinitude of impulses that we have coming in, whether from the outside, from the inside, you could imagine that we're literally flooded with impulses and all kinds of information, all kinds of stuff coming in. And this meaning making schema, it's a kind of schema that organizes all of that stuff into known categories, or at least knowable categories. And so meaning making determines our experience. So I want to emphasize that meaning making isn't like a filter that happens, that we have an experience and then it goes through a filter. No, literally our very experience, moment by moment, is determined, is given definition according to the particular meaning-making schema that is operating within us. Now, meaning-making is both an individual phenomenon and it's a socially constructed phenomenon. It's a way in which we operate together with other human beings, and it's an aspect of human consciousness that that exists in all of us. It's literally the water that we swim in. Now, the thing that we could say, I actually just add one last thing, that meaning making is, though it is probably the most ubiquitous, aspect of our psychology, the aspect of our psychology that is the most ever present in our moment by moment experience, it is also that which is the most invisible. It's like an operating system in that way. The operating system, there's nothing on our devices that is using up cycles as much as the operating system. And yet we're completely unaware of the operating system. We're unaware of its products, but we're unaware of it itself. And meaning making is kind of like that. It's literally embedded in our practices, our bodily movements. Who we are constituted to be is this meaning making. And so you could say that our meaning making makes us more than we make it. We have almost, to a certain degree, we have almost no choice in the meaning that we get made of. So who we are as human beings are like meaning-making machines, and meaning-making makes us to the degree that we are unaware of that meaning-making that's making us. So the thing I want to, so the next piece here around meaning making is that meaning making tends to go into a kind of stuck record groove. All right. It's a kind of, establishes a kind of equilibrium of patterns by which we make meaning of events and moments and situations and people. So there's a certain kind of pattern language that gets established that establishes a certain equilibrium, and which in many ways is really good because it helps us be able to get on in life. Otherwise, we'd be having to, kind of reconstruct reality moment by moment, right? So now the problem with that is that it tends to reject novel inputs. So to the degree to which our meaning making is sort of in this record groove, there are things that we actually don't notice, that we don't, that we can't make sense of. And so, so we tend to get kind of stuck. Now, the beauty of this is that our meaning making, that equilibrium, tends to evolve. So it tends, at some point, things start to happen and the old equilibrium breaks and a new equilibrium emerges. And as that new equilibrium emerges, we become capable of making sense of greater and greater complexity. And this is a phenomenon. So you can see that as our meaning making becomes more and more complex, it's represented by going further and further up along the vertical line. And this phenomenon is referred to as development. This is what we mean by development. So on the horizontal axis, we refer to what happens as learning. And on the vertical axis, what we refer to it as development. Just going to pause here. If you want to bring something in, Antoinette, how are we doing?
Yeah, as you speak, it reminds me that when something happens, we really attach to that meaning making, even though we don't know that we are and what it is, what constitutes it. So our experience of when something falls beyond the ability of our meaning making is generally to reject it, to look at it and think, well, maybe there's something wrong in the way we see it, or we're missing some of the details, or it's nonsense, especially if it gets brought to us from the outside. It's just nonsense. We require more evidence. So it's really hard. It creates a lot of angst inside us when when our meaning making gets stretched to its logical limits, even though we are not aware that it's there and that it is the thing that is holding us back. You know, we kind of blinded and blinkered by our meaning making in the moment.
So I noticed, thank you. So I noticed that there are questions and comments in the chat. Those of you who know me know that I pretty much ignore the chat because I'm too busy doing other things. Occasionally, Antoinette will look in the chat and see. So the way we're going to deal with questions is if there are, like just kind of like something that you're stuck on, like the definition of a word or something like that. We may try to scoop some of those kind of questions up. More substantive questions, we'll have a Q&A roughly around the top of the next hour when that'll start. So this is I debated whether or not, how to kind of do this today. And I've decided that I'm going to do this by just, in a sense, giving you the entire arc of this work. And okay, great. So, all right. So we've been talking about meaning making as a kind of operating system, a kind of background schema. And so you could say that inner agility, so to bring the meaning making element explicitly into our definition of inner agility, you could say that inner agility is a meaning making capacity. So it operates, inner agility is that which operates in the vertical dimension. And it refers to the meaning-making capacity to make sense in the face of moments of surprise, ambiguity, and confusion, and to be able, from that way of making sense, to be able to dance with whatever it is that's happening in the moment, including confusion, anxiety, whatever it is. Okay. So that was the first big idea. All right. The next big idea, actually that was the first question and the first big idea. Now the second question, which is harder, and I'm going to rephrase it slightly because we have a little bit, we've introduced some new language that can help us be more precise. So the question now is, how might we gain access to that meaning-making dimension of being in order to increase our capacity for inner agility? So notice that phrase, gain access. That's going to make more sense as we move into this, because this is the thing that I noticed early on in my work with organizations is in the early days I would create leadership training programs, and I would present concepts about about human development, stage development, and or whatever. But basically, this operated within the conceptual realm. And I found that people might understand the ideas, but they were unable to enact them. They were unable to embody any of this. And so this led me on to what ended up being a 2-decade kind of research project to begin to understand the nature of human transformation. What is it that catalyzes human transformation? And of course, there are lots of ways to do that. My question around human transformation is focused on within the organizational environment, as opposed to, say, maybe going to a meditation retreat or something. Okay, good. So this is the next question we want to dive into, and this is where we start to get a little deeper into things. So, so the second main idea to support this question is the distinction on the court versus in the stands. Okay, and so we're going to unpack this. We're going to introduce some philosophy. All right, so you could say that there are essentially 2 ways of understanding. So if we look at understanding reality, understanding situations, events, things that concern us, there are 2 ways to understand them. One is epistemology, from the perspective of epistemology. And I'm taking a bit of a shortcut. So those of you who are trained in philosophy, you'll notice that I'm playing fast and loose with this term, but I'm doing it in order to make a certain point. So you could say that epistemology points to basically a conceptual way of understanding things. It's a way of understanding things in which knowledge is that which we gain. Knowledge is that which can be accrued, can be grown. We can grow our knowledge on certain things. And epistemology tends to look at things from the outside. So if we look at leadership from the perspective of epistemology, we're looking at the concepts and the ideas and the skills and the abilities and how leaders think and all that kind of stuff. And all of that is in the domain of epistemology, right? Another way of understanding, very different, is phenomenology. And phenomenology is very different because phenomenology is about how things are happening in our experience. So at any given moment, we have an experience. There are things that are happening, certain feelings come up, certain thoughts come up. We find ourselves reacting to things in a certain way. And we don't necessarily even understand the nature of our reaction, right? But phenomenology points to the nature of our experience. And as a way of understanding leadership, it's about, how leadership happens or doesn't happen in our moment by moment experience. So it's a different, you could say that phenomenology gives us a different point of access to things. Okay, good. So we're gonna take a moment to unpack this a bit. I wonder if I need to just pause. Sometimes just pausing. This can be a bit intense. How are we doing? Put your thumbs up if we're doing well. Okay, good. I see a few of you. I can't see everybody on my monitor right now. Okay, great. Okay, good. All right. So we're going to look at this through kind of two different arenas of human activity. The first is tennis, and the second one will be leadership. So we'll do tennis first because it helps us to kind of parse out these ideas a little bit more clearly. So we're looking at the game of tennis, and in the game of tennis, you can look at tennis from two different places, from the stands or on the court, right? From the stands, what happens is that we're looking at that which can be observed from the outside. So for instance, I might be in the audience watching the tennis game, and I'm watching the ball go back and forth, and I'm kind of dazzled by the skillfulness if it's a professional game. And, it's very exciting being out there in the audience, and there's all the stuff that's happening, right? So that's one way in which tennis happens from the stands. Another way that it happens is if I'm really serious about tennis, I might study stat sheets on tennis players. Or if I myself am a tennis player, I might study the stat sheets of those with whom I may be playing a match in the coming weeks. I might watch videos of their game. I might, and by the way, I might also continue to, like, I know I'm going to have an opponent who has a really wicked right serve. And so I'm going to develop my capacity for my left backhand or some, by the way, I'm just making shit up. I don't know if any of this is accurately tennis. For those of you who are tennis players, please forgive my clumsy rendering of this, but you get the idea. So it's from the outside. And whenever a comment comes up, it blocks my ability to go to the next slide. Okay, there we go. Also, it could be like measured. So measuring my tennis game, I might measure like how fast can I hit the ball, how fast a ball can I hit, or so there's all kinds of ways. These are all very valuable, right? But there's another way of looking at tennis, which is on the court. And on the court is me playing tennis. And what's real when you're on the court is the ball is coming at you at 150 miles an hour, and I might get killed by it. So on the court is the way, okay, so I'm going to introduce a funny word here. The way in which the ball occurs for me, right? When I'm in a game of tennis, or when I'm in the game of leading a webinar, as I am right now, all that there is what's occurring for me. what's occurring for me, both in terms of my own feeling, I'm noticing, people's facial reactions, and and in tennis, it's just the way the ball occurs. That's ultimately, that's all that's real. So let's unpack this a little bit further. And we're going to ask a simple question: how fast is the ball moving? So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this distinction between on the court and from the stands. Okay, so if what I'm interested in, which I am, is the ability to dance with the coming ball, right, which is kind of derives from our definition of inner agility. My ability to dance with the coming ball is my capacity for inner agility with respect to tennis, right? So that's I'm interested in. Right now, one way to kind of deal with that, or one way to kind of measure it or understand it, is in relation to the clocked speed of the ball. So for someone like me, I'm not even an amateur, I'd be like way below that line, but for someone like an amateur, a clocked speed of say 130 miles an hour would be like, it would be like, I wouldn't even see it. The amateur wouldn't even see it, let alone be able to respond to it, to be able to hit it. So the clocked speed of that ball is way too fast. Whereas for the pro, the clock speed of 130 is probably completely doable. Okay, so that's, now the thing is that these two realms are unrelated. So from the perspective of playing tennis, the clocked speed, while it's interesting, is unrelated. And so it's really, the clock speed is from the stands. It's tennis from the stands. And it's in the epistemological domain. It's what we can know and measure concisely. And even though we can concisely know and measure it, it may or may not have anything to do with my ability to dance with the coming ball. All right, so now there's a different way of asking the question or understanding the question: how fast is the ball going? All right, so we're still interested in our ability to dance with the coming ball, and we still can have the clock speed of the ball, but now we're going to be dealing with something different, which is the speed of the ball as experienced. Right, so we're not interested in the clock speed right now. We're interested in how fast is the ball, does it seem to be coming? And so I'm going to do these two lines now, because of the way we had to set up these slides for Zoom. These lines should go really slow. So the line, the white line should be going up really slowly, and the blue line should be going down very slowly. And what this is telling us is that as my ability to dance with the coming ball increases, the speed of the ball as I experience it slows down. So so on the court, there is no clock speed of the ball. All there is the speed of the ball as I'm experiencing it. By the way, you may be wondering, why the hell am I talking about this? We'll come to that in a moment. Just hang with this, all right? All right. So this is tennis on the court, right? And this is tennis from the perspective of phenomenology, which is from the perspective of my experience of that ball. So what matters from the perspective of phenomenology is the speed of the ball as I experience it, or in other words, as it is occurring for me. Okay. All right. So consider, if what we're after is access to the vertical dimension of performance, we're going to need to do so through this domain of occurring. I'm going to assert that the epistemological domain, the domain of measuring from the outside, looking from the outside, concepts, ideas, will not improve my game of tennis. So that's an assertion that I'm making. Okay. All right. So now let's look at this in relation to the game of leadership. All right. Something closer to, the topic at hand. All right. So from the stands, There are all of these different ideas. So how agile leaders think, systems thinking, how to communicate more inclusively, even leadership agility. So I used to teach leadership agility with Bill Joyner years ago. And great work, participative leadership, polarity management. All of this is important work. That which can be, but it is still that which can be observed from the outside. It comes from the domain of epistemology. And while obviously these things are key to leaderful effectiveness, by themselves, they can't provide access to that vertical dimension of being that's key to masterful leadership in a VUCA world. I'm not, I'm going to be clear what I'm saying. I'm not saying that this stuff is not valuable and important. It is key. And if what we're looking for is to be able to lift my capacity for inner agility, which we are saying is a vertical capacity, we need a different point of access. And the point of access, as you're probably detecting, I'm getting to, is that which occurs on the court. So leadership on the court happens in this moment, happens in the moment of a conversation, happens in the moment of sense making, of shared sense making, happens in the moment when I have a commitment to influence the outcome of something. And all of that is the way in which situations occur for us, that the domain in which we encounter leadership as a vertical capacity is in that arena in which things occur for us, or in the epistemological realm. Okay, so here's an example. I can say, and many of you probably do, so check it out for yourself. I often find myself saying something to the effect of, I believe in open and honest communication. That's who I am. As a leader, I believe in honest and open communication. I would assert that that is a statement of espousal. I'm espousing something which may or may not be true, right? And as an espousal, it comes from the stands. And it's that which can be observed. This is distinct from, in those moments when the meeting is tense or when I'm feeling anxious, what I really believe is that if I open my mouth in this meeting, if I say something, I'll get into trouble. And that's my visceral feeling. That's my experience. So check this out for yourself, by the way, right? You may be somebody who believes in open and honest communication, but when push comes to shove, there are those moments when you keep your mouth shut out of some kind of fear, because you believe that something terrible will happen if you open your mouth. And this is on the court. This is who we are on the court. This is the domain of occurring. This is the phenomenological domain. Okay, so one is a belief that I have, that I espouse, that I can point to and say, that's what I say that I believe. And the other is what I really believe. It's a belief that has me. And for the most part, I am unaware that that belief is even there until it gets activated in some particular moment. So still encountering, every time someone makes a comment, it blocks the arrows. So I can't advance the thing. It's
Michael, just see there's a little up arrow next to the chat at the bottom of your screen, and just see if you click on it, has an option to show chat previews. Just see if you click on that, whether it solves it for you.
Yeah, I don't see that, so that's okay. It's
Okay.
not a deal. Okay, so go ahead. Sorry, Antoinette.
No. So you know, as we go through this, I've been doing quite a lot of work on model development for coaches. You know, how do I develop my model? What's in my model? Most of us don't even know that we use a model. The same thing, you know, these things develop for us intuitively, you know, and without much thinking. And not only are we unaware of them, um, we are in all, they are constraining without us even realizing. And because we don't realize that they are there, we also don't make use of the very great ability to observe and reflect on the difference between that which we espouse and that's which we exhibit in the moment, so any chance of learning needs to start with being aware of what what are those beliefs, how do I make meaning, so that I then can start comparing what I think I do, what I think I believe in, how I think I act with what really happens in the moment, in order to expand my repertoire, whether that's horizontal, because something that's also necessary to say is that our vertical development also enables further horizontal development. What becomes possible for us when we're at one level of vertical development horizontally, gets enhanced. So both from the perspective of how we are and what we do, we need to come into the realization of what is going on for us. We really need to, the first step really is to start discovering what beliefs have me
Yeah,
before we can do anything.
yeah. And the thing is that that's tricky to do, right? Um, I use the term smart rats to describe people who've been exposed to a lot of these sorts of ideas, personal development ideas, and we throw around terms, and they're meaningful terms. I don't mean to malign any of this, but our egoic mind is really tricky, and it is happy to take on any terms that we want to use to develop and improve ourselves, and use it as a way to defend itself against that development. And so this is partly why we're making such painstaking efforts, because what I've observed and what I've seen in the programs that I lead over these last years is that you actually have to sneak up on people. We have to sneak up on ourselves. We have to come around from an angle that the egoic mind is not expecting. And what that means is oftentimes we have to present things in ways that don't make sense to the categorizing epistemological mind. And this is why we make such a big deal about phenomenology here, right? So I'm going to assert once again that the primary vehicle for accessing the vertical dimension of being, is by means of what's occurring, by how situations and events actually show up. So that's kind of like the portal. All right. So I want to offer us, and I want to emphasize that last point, actually, that because we're not really talking about this in this talk, although maybe it'll come up in the conversation that we do, which is the importance of introducing questions and vocabulary and distinctions that stand ordinary understanding on its head, right? So saying things in a way that are even confusing for people. Confusion, incidentally, as many of the yogi and Buddhist masters have told us, confusion is the last portal before you get to enlightenment. That you actually have to unscramble all the known categories to be able to see what's actually going on. All right, so here's an example. We're not going to do this activity here because we don't have time, but I want to present, just to give a little taste of how we might do such an activity if we had more time. So this is an activity that's related to a challenge. All right, so we all have challenges, right? People challenge us, situations, events, all kinds of things, challenges, circumstances. And I'm going to say that a challenge is an area of stuckness that persists no matter what you try. Okay, just to put it simply, how I understand a challenge is an area of stuckness that persists no matter what you, quote, try. Note that I put the word try in quotes. To work with an area of stuckness that persists, you must have a way to step outside the structure of embeddedness that keeps that stuckness in place. In other words, we need to find a way to sneak into it. Otherwise, the egoic mind is just going to take over and just use whatever language you're throwing at it to defend itself against getting this thing unstuck. Okay, so again, if we were doing this as an activity, you can actually start to do this, and we'll share the slides with you after the session. So think of a situation or a relationship where you feel stuck. It could be big, could be small, and write down a full description. So you might, so this is going to be a build. Once I get all of these up, you could do a screenshot of it if you want to do this right after the session, which I would recommend. It'll take us a while to get the slides to you. Okay, so so you will have written down the full description. Now, here's the first question. What emotional pattern does this situation or person trigger in you? What feelings, what story about people or about yourself? You'll want to be really honest. Write this down. Incidentally, I say write this down. This is often a great practice to do with another person. And this gets into, how to create environments that support this work, which we're not going to get into today unless someone has a question about it. Okay, so now the next question, once you've dealt with that question, is now ask yourself this: what deeply, though privately held belief or truth about you, about people, about life, about the world, gets validated by this challenging situation or relationship? In other words, in what ways might you benefit from the persistence of this stuckness? Be honest and write this down, or discuss it with a partner. And then the final question is, now ask yourself, in what ways would you have to give up your attachment to the stuckness of that situation? So what this is suggesting, what this line of questioning is suggesting, is the possibility that challenges persist because there's some benefit we get from the stuckness that it creates in our life. We get a benefit from it. We get something from it. It's kind of like a racket that, we say that we're doing one thing, but we're really doing something else, right? We say we don't want that challenge, but there's something that we're up to, that the egoic mind is up to, that keeps the stuckness of that challenge around, right? So that's the sort of line of inquiry. And this is a kind of line of inquiry. So the way this works is you're not looking for a fast answer to this. You're looking to have these questions be in the background for yourself. So over the course of the next several days, as you continue to engage with that challenge or that challenging relationship, hold these questions in the background as a kind of inquiry, as a place to look. It's a kind of, you could think of it as a container to put this challenge or this challenging situation, this challenging relationship in the container that holds these questions. And notice what shows up. Notice what you see. Notice what happens, right? Invariably, if you engage in this kind of inquiry, literally the inquiry itself shifts the manner in which the world is occurring. It's so, and this I think gets to the final point that I want to make here, that the nature of this kind of work is that it alters the way that you see the world, such that the world starts to occur differently for you. So that's what we mean by transformation. Transformation is that which happens when those people out there get better. It's like one of my favorite jokes about, I attended this transformational workshop. It was a deep transformational workshop. It was one of those ones where, it was like, 4 days, we were up till 3 o'clock in the morning and hurling ourselves off of cliffs and ropes and, really, really coming to grips with our demons and going deep and, to cathartic. And then, I get home and guess what happens? everyone else got better. I did the work, but everyone else got better. And so that's the nature of this sort of work. If we want to influence the vertical dimension that gives our capacity for inner agility, it's this kind of work that we need to engage in.